In this lecture, we are going to talk about rethinking and decentering media studies. And our guest speaker today is Dr. Musab Iqbal, who is Assistant Professor of Media Studies and Media and Communication Studies at the University of Westminster, London. He has done his master and PhD from the same university, and he had done a lot of extensive fieldwork in India on the subject of the media coverage of immigrant issues in Assam, and especially he has worked a lot of things on archives. So, Musab Iqbal, most welcome to you here, and really thankful for your time. And I am now handing over the program to you. So please welcome him, and over to you, Musab.
Thank you very much. So there are two topics at hand. I don't think we can do justice to both of them. Nonetheless, we'll try to tackle these two questions of rethinking media studies and decentring. And the question of decentring is also important in terms of discipline and epistemic boundary or something. Just to understand that, obviously, I'm not just commenting I'm not going to comment on media per se, that what is the status or a state of media rather. But I am going to think about this discipline, this epistemic category, media studies, and obviously, which means that we consider what media is, but primarily our interest in this session is to rethink the boundaries or the knowledge produced through this discipline. Just to kind of recap, that media studies, as Paddy Scannell, one of the pioneering scholar of media studies, argue that the discipline itself emerged from pathologies of modernity. So the emergence of discipline, the context of it has been the fascism in Germany and Italy, immigration in the United States, and later a huge kind of flood of immigration post-Second World War in UK. So the pathologies of modernity kind of gave rise to understanding media and what media does and how to define it. And obviously it has its roots primarily in North America and in Germany. If you look at the work of Crosser, Siegfried Crosser in 1930s, he wrote a book called The Salaried Masses. And to look into the reasons of fascism, that why fascism, and I think it's a very relevant text even to us, that why fascism kind of grows. And he looks into this development or its emergence of this category of the salaried masses. And a salaried mass, maybe in India, the technocrats, those who go to Wipro and those who go to those corporations and other things, and they are paid well, they have a fixed salary, and then they come back home and then they watch TV or listen to the radio at that time mostly in Germany. And these salaried masses had the time and capability to consume the propaganda of fascism and to enhance it. So this media studies, especially from Frankfurt School, which is very bleak and pessimistic in some sense, emerged from this study of consumption of fascism by masses in some sense. And where Adorno and Horkheimer talks about this enlightenment as deception, and this idea of culture industry emerges from this conversation about enlightenment as deception. And the problem with Adorno and Horkheimer obviously was that, and more so today, where Umair Bhai was talking about the idea of audience, more so the problem is that in imagining a mass, in imagining consumption of media, Adorno and Horkheimer kind of theorize or conclude that these are essentially passive, a group of people who just consume whatever is given to them, which partly might be true. I mean, look at the patterns of the way WhatsApp group propagate and organize violence. A lot of the time, I encountered one incident where someone forwarded me something, and I pointed out the problem in those factual problems or factual discrepancies in the article, and the person said, I have not even read it, I just forwarded it. So most of the time you forward it, but the problem again is even forwarding is not a passive act. You actively decide whom to forward. So even if you look that even without reading, you are forwarding something to someone, the choice or the selection of the audience is again an active choice. That whom do you choose? Anyway, and likewise in North America with the emergence of technology or technological power of America, you have discipline is somehow North American to begin with in its kind of genesis. And even the Frankfurt School, Adorno and Horkheimer and other people, what was his name? The guy who wrote One Dimensional Man. All these people migrated to America, worked in Chicago and different universities and kind of theorized there, although German and responding the German situation, but they were in America. And in some way, there was interesting discipline, the clash of discipline as well, because early American studies of media was very empirical, Laswell and these people, and also very simplistic in some sense, two-step flow theory and other theories. In the same way, McLuhan kind of revolutionized the discipline by talking about the medium theory, and in the end, message does not mean anything, and medium is the message. What medium you use, and that's profound in many ways, and it still, I think, is very relevant, that the limit of your message, if we rephrase Wittgenstein here, limit of your message is basically limit of your medium. So what you can communicate on Instagram compared to what you can communicate on Twitter or on Facebook, it all varies there, because significantly vary, because the medium allows you certain thing and does not allow you certain thing. Does it have an effect on the message itself, on the way audience receives the message? Yes or and no. It depends on your theory and perspective and other things. But nonetheless, the importance of medium theory still stands, and in a way, more we are medium driven, I think the relevance of McLuhan is still there. I mean, but there is a lot of problem there. And Kittler, for example, comes along and he critique and his work on and his critique on medium is quite important. And we will try to reflect on one or two points, which my position in some sense as well. But the point here is that we have to keep in mind that the media studies as a discipline kind of emerged from a certain pathologies of modernity, certain crises of modernity, especially the fascism in Italy and Germany, where the films and the TVs and the posters and the leaflets, all of these were used in a big way, and then it kind of set the model for propaganda and set the model for caricaturing, set the model for stereotyping. And still, if you see scholars of media studies trying to compare, like a lot of work, you'll see the caricature of Muslim in Europe now compared to caricature or stereotyping of Jews in Germany, and similarity and dissimilarity and so on and so forth. So it's certainly this modern condition in which fascism was enabled enable. This is why I think Zygmunt Bauman's work is also quite relevant, where he talks about liquid modernity and fascism is a modern phenomenon, and that's where the modernity had to culminate in his view, because it is enabled by modernity. Whether this idea of nation, that there's something called Aryan race or German race, which Benedict Anderson's work kind of point out to, or the way it is being used, or in a way they are entrapped by it, or Heidegger would say Machenschaft, this machination in which things operate, or the Gestell, in the entrapment in which things happen. So media studies had the genesis, and then media studies kind of looked into this newspapers primarily, and somehow film, but TV was not looked in that way for a long time. And I think the work of Paddy Scannell was pioneering in media studies in the 70s, where he applied phenomenological method, and especially Heidegger, into TV, and how do we watch TV. And some very profound kind of theory emerged from his work on TV, which is very important, because Paddy talks about this hermeneutics of suspicion, on which the ground of modernity in some sense is. And he argues that that's not true. If you look at the medium, and by medium I will reflect on this idea of medium itself, or media itself, but the modern man, we thought that the emergence of a modern man is through the hermeneutics of suspicion. But what he talks about is that if you look at the modern media, and look for TV, for example, it's not the hermeneutics of suspicion, but it's the hermeneutics of trust. So that's one point. And the other point I'm making is work on TV brought by Paddy Scannell, incorporated phenomenologies, and which was very interesting. And the only example I was giving, I don't want to go into phenomenologies of media, which is very important, and I think this aspect of media studies need to be developed. And he talks about that modern subject, because modernity in some way is suspicion, founded on suspicion of the old institutions and old sciences and quote unquote old faiths and old churches and all that. And the way being operates is through this suspicion of things, and you question everything and you doubt everything, and through that you kind of find your ground. So that's in a very layman's term, the hermeneutics of suspicion. But when we look at things we consume, the media we consume, as Scannell talks about hermeneutics of trust, through which we live in this world, not through hermeneutics of suspicion. And he gives example. Obviously, he talks about TV, but before that, he talks about aeroplane. We don't know about, most of us don't know about how aeroplane works. We don't know about aerodynamics. We don't know the pilot personally. We don't know the air hostesses personally. We don't know most of the things about the airplane, yet we travel. And he said, in a mad device, in a way we are disconnected. And if we fall, we know we are not going to be saved in any sense. Why do we travel on an airplane without knowing much about it? What do we trust? Do we trust the pilot? Do we trust the system? Do we trust the device, the instrument, the mechanics, the aerodynamics, the science in general? In the same way, when someone picks the remote, obviously the age of remote is slowly ending, and age of browser is coming, and clicking is, but still we use remote control in TV today. And when we switch on the TV, why do we switch on the TV? And there is a very interesting discussion which you might like to. The point I am just making here is a general that media studies. But media studies nonetheless focus mostly on these mediums, emerging mediums and all that. And try to draw conclusions for society and politics and other things. But the problem with all of this is that and where Kittler and then John Durham Peter and his work, Marvelous Cloud, I would strongly recommend, is that media, or in general, is not just medium. It's not something, as Kittler says, that it is not empty vessels that you fill a content in it and it takes that. But as Kittler says, it's an ontological shifter. It means our condition of life is determined by this. It is not only political, everything is a medium. Our eye is a medium, our tongue is a medium. Everything we use, we touch is a form of medium. It communicates and it defines our ontological condition, the state of our being. Light is a great medium. And Marvelous Cloud kind of, and he calls it a philosophy of elemental media. In a way, plant and trees and animals, and now we have studies showing that there are work on trees, for example, which shows that trees communicate with each other, roots communicate with each other. They sense the earthquake much in advance, and there is an entire body of work emerging from how plants think and how does it help us to understand the nature and form a mode of communication. There's a very good discussion between a French philosopher, Iqbal, and a Spanish one, Michael Marder, on this mode of thinking, which they call plant thinking. So media studies traditionally has been looking into media, what we define through modernity, that what is media, and largely influenced by this category of mass, and what is used for mass communication or mass media is what we think of media. But I think we need to come out of this, and we should not look at media as something outside. And there again, Heidegger's work is very, very, very interesting or important in some sense, that the technologies we use or technologies we are in touch with, it defines our ontological condition. It defines our state of being. It is not just a matter of changing iPhone 7 to iPhone 8. Again, I mean, here you can come up with a very important philosophical question. When we think even about the materiality of the media, that what is a thing? If a philosophical question is, what is a thing? What do we call something as a thing? And where resides the thingness of the thing? Do we define thing as something with its thingness, which we can locate and find? And the question of thingness, if you look at mobile phone, for example, or iPad or of laptop, where is it a thing? Where is the thingness of the thing? Is it in the materiality of the thing or no? And if you look at most of these devices, the modern smart devices, for example, if you do not update it, if you do not update the apps, if you do not update the software, it's no longer a device. It's not a thing at all. It will not work. It will not function. So updating it, the meaning of the material thing is not in its materiality. How do we define a thing? So the objects which we use to communicate, it is not only to communicate, and we have to understand this as well, that everything we are using to communicate is also a way of defining the self. We do understand ourselves by communicating as well. So for example, Gumbrecht's work on latency, and a lot of the time, our own self-recognition is latent. Only by speaking about something, we recognize what we are. And in Farsi poetry, if you go, you will find Sadi saying that we don't know a person until he opens his mouth. So, and person himself does not know himself. Only through this medium of communication, he comes to recognize himself. Which in Sufi theory is quite profound, and when it is said that man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbuhu, it's a mode of communication. It is quite a profound philosophical statement itself, that how do we know ourselves? And only this knowing is not only inside, this knowing is also outside. So in a way, it's hermeneutical as well. The activity you do outside, it comes to define you as well. This is why Heidegger's work on poetry is quite fascinating, that poetic mode of living or thinking as opposed to technological mode of thinking. Because in a technological mode of thinking, you are entrapped, you are in the Gestalt, you are in the Machenschaft. While opposed to this poetic medium, once a poet says something, he comes to realize what he is or what his thought is only through that work of communication or work of poetry. But anyway, I don't want to digress too much there. But media studies uh, kind of uh, needs to we have to rethink what we are calling media and consider trees and ecological surroundings into media rather than thinking in a very truncated, limited way about media. So that's very brief commentary. I mean, because the study of media should not be limited to the study of medium. Study of media means a study of our ontological condition and how these materialities or immaterialities or these mediums are coming to define our state of being, because in the end, everything is a media, is a thing which we are touching and using it to communicate something or receiving some form of communication. The second aspect to this rethinking is in terms of discipline. As I said, that early research and even till now is too much focused on TV and this and that. And after Arab Spring, a wave of optimism also emerged about new modes of communication and the logic of, there's a very interesting work called Logic of, so early work on social movement, logic of collective action. But now people are talking about logic of connective action. So from collective to connective, and does connective entails collective or it does not entail that? What is this kind of, what is embedded in this idea of connectiveness? But that's a different debate. What I'm trying to say here is that the discipline itself, especially after Arab, whatever you call revolution, uprising, spring, depends on your understanding of the whole thing. Nonetheless, the lot of research started to happen. A lot of it was very superficial optimism about technology and the power of Twitter, and it was called Revolution 2.0 and Twitter Revolution. And all these countries, we know where they are: Egypt, Syria, Libya, all these countries. Why technology cannot save them now? So we can think about this over optimism and uh, over reliance, or in a way unnecessary. And this certainly shows that when we look into media, the optimism is a result of um, not localizing media studies, not understanding the pathologies of power, not understanding the power relations, which allows and does not allow, and how these identities are shaped by new relations of power. So what's happening in at least in UK, what we see in terms of department is that media studies department is so slowly or rapidly, depends again on perspective, is becoming department of basically digital studies. So what it means is that it's no longer wants to be seen as a traditional, and this is why you have digital ethnography and digital anthropology and anything with digital. So departments are renamed now, like degrees are no longer media studies degree, or for example, I think our university do not give any degree in, it's called DMC, Digital Media and Communication, BA in DMC. So this this shift towards digital, and which slowly was happening here is less critical and less theoretical, and trying to build more capacity, digital capacity of students. Also the research, a lot of research is not grounded in any philosophical or any powerful understanding of our ontological condition, rather than looking at the digital, whether you take 1,000 tweets and analyze it or other ways. So in a way, there is a limitation, and the challenge, another challenge is, or that media studies cannot be called media studies anymore in traditional sense, because now what it wants to do is to study technology, and more media departments are interested in technology and powers of technology and power relation produced through technology, whether digital or otherwise. And then the question of big data. So a lot of media studies departments are now offering courses in data studies and big data. And like, for example, in our university, you have MA in data culture and society. So the challenge is again, the question of data and what data is doing to our, or the access to data, or the organization of the data, or what we call algorithmic mode of thinking. All three are different things, but algorithmic mode of thinking, or the way data is organized, it has a deeper implication on our ontological condition, our choices, what we do, what we choose. And we know from a number of studies that once our pattern is identified by the system, it gives us choices, and we think we have choice, but we are living in illusion of choices. And same way, data can be extended to new forms of violence and new theories of which is emerging of data imperialism and data colonialism, where big companies have huge amount of data and kind of determine and influence the power relations in different countries, for example, in Africa and so on and so forth. And also in forms of violence, there are different forms of violence, which is being possible through datafication, whether it's a police violence, and if you look into America, how this Pred Poll kind of app make violence against Black people more technological, or in Delhi riots, for example, the Vahan app was used to identify the vehicle of Muslims and being destroyed, and also the way data has been used and utilized. Look into the case of Aadhaar and the problem of the Aadhaar, and again, problem of this app which was created during the trace and track app. What is it called? The trace and track app?
Arogya Setu.
Arogya Setu, and also India does not have a strong digital privacy laws and so on. But let's not go into India at this point. What I'm saying is that yes, all these bring new questions and push the discipline to reconsider. And very few people work on newspapers these days. And if you look at my department, I mean, most of the people work on digital, one form or the other, social media and other things. Also, the other problem with media studies, which it needs to rethink, is the relationship with history, and that's a very important aspect which needs thinking, and how the history and historical categories are made through either digital or technological. These are a few things about rethinking. I just want to quickly go through decentring. And by decentring, what I mean is de-westernizing in some sense, and also decentring in one sense, which I have already talked about, is to not center it around just material medium, newspaper, but to decenter it and to see it everywhere in some sense. as our ontological condition, as our state of being, in a way we consume things. And the other aspect is de-Westernizing it. And obviously de-Westernizing is much more complex than we think. Even in this country, we are talking about decolonizing the curriculum and decolonizing this and that. And this is why I think decenter would be more possible than de-Westernizing or decolonizing. We just push the center and to displace the center. The problem with decolonizing knowledge, which I mean, it's more a strategy, I would say, than a theory or philosophy. And also, a radical way to decolonize something would be to de-universitize it. I mean, only by abandoning university or you can truly decolonize the way knowledge is produced, because knowledge in modernity is institutionalized, and the institutionally produced knowledge legitimize and delegitimize. It determines what is knowledge and what is non-knowledge. And if we are calling this as a form of colonization, where you say this is myth and this is reason, and only reason can be studied as an object of knowledge, then we have to certainly rethink about what university is in that context. But since that's very radical, perhaps, and far-fetched, what people are talking about is to, at least in this part of the world, is to have more diverse authors and readings and critical reading of history and all that. So de-Westernizing it and decentering it. But I obviously some people think decentering and de-Westernizing is the same thing, but I think there is some distinction between decentering and de-Westernizing. And the centering part is to look at our own existence in some sense and power relations through that center of knowledge and how the knowledge has been produced from that very center. So we need to, and a de-Westernizing obviously emerged from a lot of different kind of a strand of thought, especially emerged in this part of the world, including the influence of the postmodern thinkers and the critique of the modernity, and then the studies of colonization offered by post-colonial thinkers and people like Said and others. And then de-Westernizing has its own challenge and problems, because Tariq Sabri, for example, is studying media studies in context of Arab thought and modernity, kind of identifies that it might lead to essentialism, and it might also lead to reverse Orientalism. It might lead to some kind of Occidentalism. And he identifies that in case of Arab contemporary thought and modernity, you have three approaches: a historicist Marxist approach, which kind of believes in a radical break from the past and a call for universality. And then you have rationalist, a structuralist position, which wants to kind of historicize the heritage by modernizing it and find a reconciliation with the present. And then you have cultural Salafist position, where they think of Arab and Islam as a key component of Arab culture and use it as a coherent civilizational model with obviously its own universality. So it might give rise to some sort of essentialism. Some Chinese scholar like Yu Zhao talks about, in context of media studies, of rethinking media studies and what it should include, especially if people here in this country or in North America talking about China, I mean, they need to also decolonize or de-Westernize or decenter. And she identifies 5 points of rethinking Chinese media studies, for example, and which is reroute the area in history and re-embed the area in the social terrain, redefine agency, and re-engage with meaning and community, and recovering utopian imaginations. So In terms of India, we do not have a very great or profound kind of rethinking in media studies as much as I am aware. I mean, people like Dea Thusu has worked a lot, but his work is again very optimistic, thinking of India as a new soft power and regional power, and how India can contribute to global. So obviously, their work is informed in some sense by the globalization optimism of the offered by globalization. Also, the challenge is to redo the media studies in local history and to look into how communities come to terms with communication and forming of identities and the new relations offered through relations of power, mode of communication. I just want to again go to Santos, whose work on epistemologies of the South is very crucial and critical in the colonial thought and the westernization thought. And he kind of hypothesizes that obviously any understanding of the world exceeds the West's understanding of the world. So the West's understanding of the world is indeed limited and might be very important, but this is not the center through which we should and through that we look. So in making our identity and new relations, there's also a very good book called Asia's Method, and Asian countries and Eastern countries can constitute their identities by in relation to their neighbors, and rather than referring to the West, and this is something like how Laura Mulvey talks about male gaze. And this male gaze, this idea of male gaze can be extended to colonial Western gaze as well, that we start to look ourselves only through that frame or only in that mirror. So our own understanding of our own self, our own history, of our own community, of our own category is through that gaze or through that reference. So it is not only in case of female, as Laura Mulvey talks about, is that woman does not look at herself directly. She looks at herself through the male gaze. This can be further extended in some sense that we look at ourselves through that colonial gaze. Anyway, that point aside, the other important thing, I mean, Santos offers in his work is that the understanding of the world and the way it creates and legitimizes social power have a lot to do with conception of time and temporality. And here I think media studies is very, very critical. And the way media or the forms of communication constitute history, organize knowledge of history, and make sense of time, and in a way constitute the category of historical time is very, 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 very essential. And the question of temporality is at the heart of any work on media studies, any work on mode of communication or of medium entails that we take into account the question of temporality and the categories of time. So, for example, Rika talks about narrative as guardian of time. I mean, my own PhD in some sense is basically to contest this historical time of immigrant, that how do we come to determine the time of an immigrant, a Bangladeshi immigrant, or there are a number of names, infiltrator or mass production, a woman body is kind of identified, Bengali woman body is identified as producing a lot of children. So if you look into Assamese local newspaper, the common semantics or the semantic field of immigrant includes alien, infiltrator, terrorist, Bangladeshi, children producing machine, and so on and so forth. The thing is that these are not linguistic problem per se or political problem per se. And this, in my work, I kind of look into deeply that any question of immigration is never a question of mobility. That's a mistake which a lot of us make. The question of immigration or migration or an immigrant is always a problem in time. And how do we determine when an immigrant cross boundary or border of any nation or territory or a city, is always crossing a border of time as well. So there is always a chronopolitics in the body of an immigrant. And the problem of immigration or migration is not just a problem of mobility. It's a serious problem of time and temporality. And the way we narrativize an immigrant, we also categorize time, and we produce new categories of time. So always we are producing new chronographs when we are narrativizing immigrant, for example. So the question of decentring is also the question of how do we engage with the category of time? How do we engage with the question of temporality, and so on and so forth?
So thank you very much, Dr. Musab, for this fascinating interaction. And we really wish that we have you once again in our next programs as well.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye, good luck.
Pleasure.